Welcome to another episode of the Book of Nook Show. My name is Kyle Colley, and this is an episode of Founders Talk, a podcast for founders to tell their stories, their ideas, and visions of the future. Today, we have a special guest and good friend of mine, Leah Hernandez. Leah is an author. She is the founder of Young Authors Publishing, a children's young adult book publishing that exists to share the stories of Black and Brown young people. She is also the founder of Muse Inc., which is a publishing for adult and fiction and nonfiction works written by BIPOC founders. She is a Clark Atlanta University grad. She is an educator, a compassionate leader, a change agent in the publishing space. Welcome, everybody. And Leah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. I would love to kind of start from the beginning, from your childhood, since you do a lot of childhood books. I'd love to hear when did you first fell in love with books, and what were the moments that kind of shaped your childhood as well?
Ooh, that's a good question. I didn't necessarily there was a time period in my childhood where I was like a really heavy reader. It was around like the Twilight era. And I remember I read all those series and there were no Black folks in there. So I would just like imagine that Edward was Black and that all the characters were Black. That's what I would do. And then I went to high school and I started having to like read all these required books where I didn't see myself reflected. And so my love of reading just really dwindled. And I was like, yeah, maybe this isn't for me. And then when I got to college, that's when I started reading a little bit more now in my adulthood. So I definitely feel like I had to fight to get my love of reading as an adult because it wasn't just always there as a kid. It was pockets where it was great, and then it would dwindle because of just the access to the books that I had.
Yeah, and speaking of access, when you were growing up, did you see a lot of like Black children's books or anything like that? Not
Not
much.
at all. Yeah,
Yeah.
no.
So, what were those role models as like young entrepreneurship then? Like, or where did you start to figure out, hey, this is what I want to do, some more entrepreneurial things in publishing?
Yeah, well, the entrepreneur in me really didn't start until I went to Clark Atlanta University. But when I look back at my childhood, I realized that it was always there. So I remember my mom, I grew up in a single parent household, and my mom worked multiple jobs, and, we never had to ask for anything. But during one of those time periods, she, like those third level marketing programs,
Oh
like
yeah,
Life or like
MLMs.
Princess House. So I think she was, so we did them all, but there was a time period where she was doing Cookie House, or Cookie Lee, I think was the name, and they did jewelry. And so she would have people come to the house and she would set up the jewelry and then she would make the transaction, she would cook food. And I remember being like, dang, like I want to get money too. So I went to Michael's and like I got all these beads and like I made my own bracelets and necklaces. And I ended up like selling more than than my mom. Cause like, and I'm also a kid. So like who's gonna
Yeah.
sell to a kid? So I think that was always there and inside me, but I wasn't exposed to it until I went to Clark Atlanta. So my freshman year of Clark Atlanta University, I got a work study job, and I was placed with the financial literacy department. And it was Dr. Lakeisha Landers who was running that program, and she's still my mentor to this day. But she taught me everything I know about financial literacy and entrepreneurship, and that's kind of where I got the bug. And year later published my book, and that's how I fell into publishing. I had no relationships at all in this space. I kind of just found myself in it.
Yeah, and I love the motto of Clark too, is like find a way or make a way, right? And it's just that idea of like no matter what, we're gonna figure out how to make this happen, right? So when you started your young author publishing while on campus, like what motivated you, or like how did you start on the journey of publishing?
Yeah, so my sophomore year of undergrad, I got the vision to write and publish my own book. That actually came through a study abroad trip that I had taken to China. And one of the other students who was on the trip with me, he had wrote a book and he had it with him. And I read his whole book while we were on, it was like a 2-week trip. And it was about his journey in going through mental health illness and having to be in and out of a psych ward. And it was just his whole life testimony. But I was just so impressed with the fact that he had a story to tell and he actually put it in a book. And we were all reading that book on that trip. And so I wrote my first chapter of my book while I was on that study abroad
Oh,
trip, came back to the States, and that whole summer was just like trying to figure out how do I put a book together. So I remember there's a woman, Tressa Azarel, And she would have like these calls where people, like free calls where you could call in and ask her any questions about how to publish. And I remember I went to all those calls, and that's how I learned about how to get an ISBN, a copyright, how to get my book on Amazon. And so did that, published my book. And I was supposed to like climb the corporate ladder. Like I wanted the good, high paying corporate job. So that's what I went back to focusing on and getting my internships. And then a mentor of mine uh, told me about a grant that the Atlanta Housing Authority was doing, and it was for a new youth development program. And I'm like a junior at the time, so I'm like, I don't really know how to do nothing yet. I haven't mastered anything, but I put a book together, so maybe I can help kids do that, and they can keep the royalties, and it would be a one-time program. And I did that. We helped 4 young girls write and publish a book called Roxy's Day in Vine City. You know that
Yeah.
Vine City is a real community. At the time, it was being rapidly gentrified. That's right when the stadium had went up during that time. I think it was like right before the stadium went
Yeah.
up. So the kids in the community were seeing the changes that were happening in real time. And so they wrote a beautiful book about the community through the eyes of a Chihuahua who was walking the streets of Vine City. And we got a lot of support from that book. The community loved it, schools loved it, people were ordering. And I saw the connection of kids having a really great imagination and having dope ideas and not second guessing it. But then I also knew like the lack of diversity in children's books, and it just seemed like a great program to get kids access to capital and then to create more diverse books. So the following year, we did 13 books by 13 young men, and we've just been going ever since.
No, I love that. And so from young author publishing, now you move into Muse. So I would love to hear just how your publishing process has changed through those two, and then also would love to hear what you have going with Muse as well, Inc.
Yeah, so Muse really came because Young Authors Publishing was always a publishing company that was always going to serve children of color. I mean, it's in the name. Like, it's hard for
Yeah.
me to publish somebody in their 50s under an imprint called Young Authors Publishing. So I knew that I wanted to work with adult authors, and transparently, I just got tired of having to turn down manuscripts because it just didn't fit the brand. And then I saw a bigger world and gaps that needed to be filled for people of color in publishing, like access to distribution and being able to support authors, adult authors of color. And so that's why I started Muse. We have, I think, 5 or 6 books coming out this year under that imprint. The first book coming out is actually a meditation deck called Kinfolk Meditations, written by Siobhan Anderson, who's the founder of I Paper Co. out of New Jersey. And then we have a cookbook that was actually written by 2 sisters that both went to Clark Atlanta
Oh,
University
wow.
too.
There you go.
Yep. So one's vegan, one's non-vegan, and so it's recipes for the whole family. And then we have some more exciting books coming out later this spring and in the fall and winter season. But in addition to having our own authors and publishing our own books, we also are distributing other Black-owned publishers. So as I grew in the publishing space, I realized that it was really hard for publishers to scale their companies because they didn't have access to global distribution, and they didn't necessarily know how to reach their end reader. And so we have 2 publishers that we now distribute: an art magazine and then a children's publisher as well.
No, that's beautiful. And I want to know, so how do you look for authors? Or because you know that the whole, at least from where I've seen it, is like the publishing industry goes through a lot of stages. You got to carry your book, and you got a lot of yeses, a lot of no's. So like when it comes to you all, how do you, facilitate which author you are going to represent?
Yeah, it's a great question. The first one, which we're really unapologetic about, is that you have to be a person of color. So we are interested in diverse stories. Although I love my agents and I have a lot of agents that are friends, we don't go through agents. I mean, agents can send us stuff, but we see that as a barrier to entry for a lot of people of color. And so we have submissions that are open throughout the year. We have time periods where we encourage people to submit because we just have more space and capacity. But we're just looking for really interesting stories. Now I have imprints where we do both children's and adult. And we have an art magazine that we now distribute. So it's really any book in between we're willing if it fits one of the brands that we have.
No. And then how's it been like when it comes to being a Black woman in the publishing space? Like I know that there's a lot of barriers in just every, industry, but I would want to know specifically when it comes to books where it's like it feels like a lot of times we don't see all these different books of representation. You see it more now, but in general, it's been tough.
Yeah, it's it's tough. It's tough. I say it's tough for me too because although I'm from California, which is very diverse, I grew up around all races and ethnicities. But then I went to Clark Atlanta and I was like 3, 4 HBCUs all in one. And so I'm
Yeah.
around Black people all day. And then I stayed in Atlanta. So from going from that to going into a space that's predominantly white, that has like less than 8% of people of color who work in this space, I do a lot of trade shows, I do a lot of conferences, and I'm often either the only Black woman or one of two, and I'm almost certainly always the youngest. And so it's difficult because I think a little bit more about how I show up in that space. Like, can I show up as myself? Can I, use the slang that I would normally say to my team? And, I've definitely had racist encounters. I've had white men touch my hair and ask if it's real. I've, had distributors tell me they wouldn't take me on because I'm a pet prod. Like I've gone through all of the things. But I think me going through that just gives me more fuel to keep doing the work that I'm doing because I would hate for another Black woman to want to work into this space and to have some of the experiences that I have, which is why I started Muse, because I feel like there needs to be a safe space for Black people in publishing to learn, to grow, and to be themselves and to show up in their own authentic ways. And that's hopefully what Muse will be able to do when we start moving to events.
No, I love that. And then when it comes to like being a founder and visualizing what a future looks like, in your opinion, what does like the future of publishing look like if we do diverse books correctly or anything like that?
I think so I'm an independent publisher. I speak up a lot for independent publishers. I sit on the board for PubWest, which is an association for small to mid-sized publishers. And I think that publishing needs to start looking at their books as products. And I think that publishers need to have more connection and more relationships with the end reader. I think publishers are just used to selling through the trade, selling through their distributor, and not having any communication or relationship with the readers. But I think you miss the mark because you don't know what they want, they
Yeah.
don't know what they need, and you don't know how they want to be marketed to. And so I know for Muse, the future of our company is to cut out the distributor, start doing distribution ourselves with our own warehouse, and knowing who our end reader is and having that data so that way we can serve them better. So hopefully other independent publishers too can recognize that, and can start selling direct to consumer more, and having more relationships with the end reader. I also think that the future for publishing, I think if people who are in power do what they do right, I think we can see more diversity in it. But I think that a lot of things have to change at the systemic level. I'm also really curious to see what different associations do, so that way we can have more advocacy around independent publishers. This is a $120 billion industry globally, and the US alone gives 25 billion. So it's money in this industry, but I think a lot of times it just goes to the big five, and there's a lot of systems in place that don't, make it equitable for people of color or independent publishers to succeed. So hopefully that'll change, but we'll see. I don't have
No,
all the
yeah, I
answers.
said I know I enjoy that you how you talked about it, right? A book is like a piece of a product, and even more, it's a story, right? And it has IP and has long tail wins for people that are the authors and the creators of these stories. I would love to hear what makes a great story for you. Like, what do you look for in a story?
It's a good question. I look for how it's going to impact the reader and who that target reader is, and hopefully what that book can do to create change. And I'll use an example. We just signed on an author, whose book will be published later this year, called Adopting Privilege. And it's about a transracial adoptee, a Black woman who grew up in a white household and with a white family, and what her experience is. And she's a phenomenal, woman and educator and doctor and does a lot in the higher ed space. And so when I read her submission, I knew instantly that I wanted it because I could see how that book could impact an entire industry and system that has not always done the best with supporting adoptees. And so what I look for in a book is how it can create impact, more long-term impact. Like, this is a book that will be required reading in universities, that social workers will read, that transracial adoptees and just, general adoptees will read as well, and will help them in their own identity. So the end reader is always front of mind, and how it's going to help the end reader in their life is a priority for me when I look at books.
Yeah, I've heard it in a lot of different ways when you're talking, but I'm interested to hear like what are like subtle or like unobvious reasons that have made you successful in the publishing space. Like, is it like you go for different type of books that are other people are looking for, or different voices, or what do you say there?
Yeah. Quite frankly, I think it's because it's not a lot of us in this space. And so it's a whole community of people who have not been marketed to, who have not been supported, and who have not been given a platform to share their stories. And so when you don't serve a community since the inception of publishing, then there's going to be so many stories and so many readers and so many opportunities for them to grow. So I really do feel like we have an advantage because we're serving people who have always been excluded from this industry or overlooked. But as far as like my own, I guess more specifically, maybe what has helped us is I don't know, I have a little Delulu in me. So like I think that I can come into this like very white industry and like switch it up and have more of us in the space. And
Yeah,
I think that that has carried me a long way. And to your point earlier, I come from CAU, so we find a way or make one. So
yeah.
these systems weren't built for me to succeed. That's totally fine because I'm gonna make a way for me to get in there and for the
Yeah.
people I want to get
And I
in.
think entrepreneurs at the end of the day, that is what helps us create the worlds that we want to see. It's just that almost you said the Lulu, but and it's also like just like that raw determination or just like that true belief in yourself or faith, whatever you want to call it, that really is like I can make this happen, right? I'd also just want to know a little bit about how it goes when you are publishing when it comes to marketing and various authors. Because when I see a lot of, especially with big fives, they have millions of books that come. Well, I say thousands of books that come out each year, and it's a lot of like sometimes it feels like the author even sometimes has to market a lot for their books. I want to know like when it comes to working with your company, how do you all go about marketing and helping those various authors get big or help them get their book out in the world?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, the difference with independent publishers is that we're not the big five. We don't have those big budgets to be able to spend. The marketing that we do has to be very organic, but also very strategic. So, one of the things that's helped us in marketing is specifically from a sales lens, is trying to find retail locations that don't normally purchase or buy books and convincing them to carry our books. So, for example, we have a farm book that's coming out this spring. It's a board book about Black farmers, and it's about a grandson and his grandchild. And so we're reaching out to all of the plant shops and going to farmers markets, and partnering with associations of Black farmers. And we think really holistically about the marketing. But I will say, which may be a shocker to authors and maybe an unpopular opinion, is that it truly is a partnership. So authors do need to market and publishers also need to market. The weight of that varies depending on what publishing house you come from. For us personally, as a company, we come up with title campaigns for all of our books. We share that with the authors, and then we ask the authors what they feel like they have the capacity to do. And so it's very clear from the beginning that it takes the both of us, but we definitely take the lead on the direction of marketing, and then of course we hear from the authors and what they want to do too. But it's a partnership. I think that authors will be very disappointed and will continue to be disappointed if they think that they can just sit back and not do anything with their book, um, because it takes a lot of times the author is a subject matter expert at whatever they're talking about, and so it takes their involvement in order for a publisher to do their job well too.
Yeah, so we get a chance to talk to authors too, and a lot of them have talked about like that balancing of social media, and they're like, it's so interesting how I have to also get my social media in there, but they learn so much from being able to market their book and put it out in the world as more than just just the book itself, right? But I would love as we kind of wrap up. I know you talked a little bit about your future projects, but let us know any upcoming books that are coming out that we can support and let our listeners know about.
Yeah, the first one under the Young Authors Publishing imprint is a book called Not to Anything, which is written by Pepper Pursley. She's a 12-year-old sports journalist. She's an absolute, and she's just an incredible young woman. She's interviewed so many people and is so intelligent and shares a really beautiful story about how to overcome bullying I've been bullied, she's been bullied, so many people have been bullying, and a lot of the people that she's interviewed have had that experience. And so she's taken all those lessons and put it into a book to help kids who are experiencing that. We also have kinfolk meditations that's coming out in the next few months, just in time for Mother's Day. It's meditations and affirmations for the entire family and community. We have a cookbook, which is Tempted to Taste It, that's coming out. The farm board book that's coming out this spring or summer. But it's a lot of books. I would just say go to museinc.net, sign up for our newsletter, follow us on socials, and that way you can just be updated with all of the books that we publish.
Absolutely. I'll make sure to put in the show notes so that everybody can reach out, and we'll make sure to share about you all as well. Leah, thank you again so much for being on the Bookham show, and I just really do appreciate you.
No, thanks for having me.